Hello, welcome back to the next part of my You Ask, I Answer on Dr. Von Schiller question regarding rapid decline in circulation of comic books in the early 70s and the rising ticket price on the book. At the end of last video, I mentioned that one of the big event that happened sometime in the early 70s or mid 70s was a change in return policy. I still have not found the exact time frame, so I will just have to speculate that based on what I read, and hopefully some of you have had a chance to follow the links that I had in the previous video where I linked to Chuck Admire, where he wrote a lot of articles on the birth of direct market. Great reading, it's definitely shine a lot of light into many of the questions that I had. So once again, what I'm about to talk about in this video is not, I don't think it's gonna be a lot of new things, but more so based on everything that I read. I formulate some of the stuff and kind of tie all the dots together. So as we begin the early 70s, one of the, prior to the big event I was talking about, where newsstand and distributors no longer have to physically return the book to get a refund, that make a huge difference, because up until that point, based on what I understand, it was pretty typical for Marvel and DC to be able to sell out 60 to 65% easy on most of their titles. For example, what I'm saying is, if Marvel print out 400,000 copies of Fantastic Four through the distribution system and the newsstand, on the average they can sell 240 to 275,000 copies. That's 60 to 65%. Okay, so, and that was a margin that was doable, was profitable for everyone involved. Sure, it's profitable for Marvel, it's profitable for the distributors, and so up until the early 70s, this is what happened. Okay, when you return the books at the end of the 3 months where the book was at the newsstand, the distributors then can have to physically count the books and then give you credit, the newsstand credit, for what was not sold. And over time, since the 40s and the 50s and even the 60s, the cost of shipping back those unsold books make it impossible. It's become too costly to return it. So somehow change was made. From everything that I read, they call it the affidavit return. This is where the publishers now have to accept a number from the distributors that certain amount is not sold without any proof of physical numbers. Okay, so think about this. If you print 400, using the same example that I used before, if you printed 400,000 copy of Fantastic Four, and let's say the distributors in the newsstand, if the distributors was not an honest distributors, he can easily lie and say, listen, I only sell 50,000 copy of the 80,000 that was sent to me. So I need credit for the other 30,000. Marvel then will credit him. But what to say that if he sold 80,000? There are no system in place to verify any of those numbers, okay? And based on what I read, even Jim Shooter link that I had before, he even mentioned it where there was widespread fraud where distributors would lie on how much was not sold in order to get credit. So think about this. If you receive 100,000 comic books from Marvel and you sold 50,000, but you went back to Marvel and say, I only sell 20. Guess what? You got credit for 80,000 copies. And you can still sell them. So instead of, on top of not having, on top of getting the credits for the 80,000 copy that you claim you didn't distribute to the newsstand that was not sold, you now can sell them to the newsstand and comic shops around the country for half the price that they used to get before. So it's all kind of side dealing that really hurt Marvel and DC. So because of that kind of cheating, widespread cheating that happened in the mid-70s, by now it's pretty widespread, it's pretty ugly. I have looked at a lot of numbers and it is shocking on how bad the numbers were. You literally see, from the early 70s where Marvel was able to sell 60 to 65% of what they printed, all the way down to 25%. That's how bad it was. Imagine printing 400,000 copies and then only get the money for 100,000 copies. There is no business model in publishing that can survive if that was the case. Okay, you can't print 4 and sell 1. The production cost, the distribution cost would kill you. And this is what happened in the mid-70s, and this is a big part, in my opinion, on the fallout of the Neal Adams run with the X-Men, because that took place right at this time where the popularity of the book was never properly translated back to the Marvel headquarters to tell them that the series was a success. Because on top of taking 3 or 4 months for sales data to reach the heads at Marvel, the sales data is already cooked, baked, and flawed, and the data was ugly. Okay, so and I think even Neal Adams has mentioned, I heard somewhere and read somewhere that Neal Adams even mentioned that this could have been one of the reasons as far as the sales figures being so wrong during his run at the X-Men, because distributors was cheating. That's about the nicest word I can describe the situation. So back to Dr. Von Schiller question on the declining of readership in the early 70s. I do not think that was the case. That was a perception that Marvel and DC and other publishers had at the time. But the truth is, the 300,000 or 400,000 copies of these books that was printed and distributed out made it out there. One way or the other, there was people buying them. That's why one of the reasons there are so many high-grade Bronze Age books in the mid-70s around, it is because of this kind of under-the-table kind of dealing. So it's unfortunate, but I think the decline in readerships and circulation was not as bad, in my opinion, as perceived by Marvel and DC, to a point where they were almost bankrupt. I mean, the direct market there was a necessity. If you read I will provide the links again to Chuck's Mile High articles, because if you read the history of distribution without the change to direct marketing, Marvel and DC would not have survived. They could not have survived because the business model was broken at the time. One other thing that I want to end this video before one other thing I want to say before I end this video, because I had the feeling this video will run too long, and we need a third part to this answer, is the direct market existed in the late 70s. Okay, it started to take hold. System started to being built to handle the way Marvel and the big players want to take part. But the way Marvel distinguished newsstand and direct market didn't really take hold until late 1979, and I will talk more about that in the third part of this answer, because I think you will find it very interesting. But before I go, I will end this video with a video where I will point out the circulation data and the flaw information in it. You'll be surprised of how the numbers were calculated back in the late 70s. Yes, anyhow, thanks for watching, and I hope the video makes some sense. Until next time, bye. Here, what you have here is a scan of the circulation data that was provided by Marvel on a yearly basis. Once a year, if you flip through enough books, you will see that on one of the pages, Marvel will print the circulation data for the previous year. Right here is issue 1, Daredevil 158, the first issue of Frank Miller on the title. And just take a look at this data. So this Frank Miller came on to Daredevil at the the first part of 1979. So what you have here is 1978 circulation data. Okay, so let's look at this. Total number of copies printed. If you look at the average, okay, the average is 393,000, almost 394,000. But the most recent issues, which is last month, is only 250,000 or so. So it is not news that Daredevil, the title, was in rapid decline when Frank Miller got a chance to work on a title. Okay, but let's take a look at this paid circulation. Just under 107,000. Look at that. And the closest to date, so last month, only 88, under 90,000 copies was paid circulation. Okay, unbelievable. And then if you keep reading below, but this gives you an idea of how poorly the newsstand market was, and I will elaborate more now that you have a chance to see. As you can see, what is driving the market to direct
sales, okay? Because you cannot print almost 400,000 copy here and only sell 26% of it. That is just, there's no business model in publishing that's gonna work.